Graduation ceremonies are universally designed to be excruciating. They are supposed to be emotional. Tears, suffocating hugs, and overly dramatic speeches about stepping into the future, not whatever this absolute train wreck was. I was sitting exactly 3 rows from the front, sweating in a polyester gown, halfway through regretting my entire academic career and fully committed to being bored out of my mind. The valedictorian was droning on about reaching for the stars when the rich guy stood up. Let me clarify, he wasn't just rich, he was obnoxiously wealthy. The kind of generational wealth where his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit probably cost more than my entire existence and my student loans combined. Julian Vance. Yeah, that Julian Vance. Cold, mathematically perfect, and utterly terrifying. He was the human equivalent of a locked titanium vault, and apparently, he was feeling romantic today. He walked straight up the steps and onto the stage like he owned the university, which, honestly, his family probably did. He didn't ask for the microphone. He simply took it from the hands of our deeply confused, trembling dean and turned his freezing gaze toward Silas Thorne. Silas. Beautiful, untouchable Silas. The kind of guy people write tragic poetry about and then cry over in the middle of the night. He had the face of a fallen angel and a personality just as unreachable. So naturally, Julian decided this was the perfect, most logical time to propose in front of 3,000 people at our college graduation. Because subtlety is for peasants, the entire auditorium went dead silent. It was a painful, suffocating quiet. Even the air conditioning seemed to hold its breath. Julian Vance got down on one knee. He produced a velvet box and flipped it open, revealing an actual blinding diamond. It was the size of a quail egg and probably illegal in at least 3 developing nations. "I love you," Julian said. His voice was flat, controlled. It sounded less like a confession of undying devotion and more like he was announcing a hostile corporate merger. "I want you to stay with me forever," Julian continued, his icy eyes locked onto Silas. "Stay with me, not be with me, stay." Yeah, that phrasing right there, that already sounded like a marching band of red flags. Everyone in the hall held their breath. Silas didn't. He just looked down at the kneeling billionaire. His expression was calm, way too calm. Then Silas smiled, a soft, almost apologetic curve of his lips. "I can't." "Oh, hell yes," I thought, leaning forward in my plastic folding chair. "This is getting interesting. I don't love you the way you want," Silas continued, his voice steady and echoing through the silent hall. "And I can't live like that anymore. You don't love me, Julian. You manage me. Damn." Somewhere in the row behind me, a girl audibly choked. Julian didn't move. He didn't blink. He didn't even seem to breathe. If marble statues could feel public humiliation, Julian Vance was the blueprint. "I want a normal life. I want freedom. Not this," Silas added, his voice dropping to a final, devastating whisper. And just like that, the proposal was rejected. Publicly, brutally, unapologetically, silence dropped over the entire hall like a heavy coffin lid. No one moved. No one spoke. No one even dared to shuffle their feet too loudly. And me? Well, I was bored, slightly annoyed, and my legs were cramping. I figured if you're going to stage a high-profile public proposal and traumatize an entire graduating class, you should at least make it entertaining all the way to the end. So, naturally, I fixed it. I leaned back in my seat, stretched my arms casually, and spoke loud enough for my voice to carry across the breathless auditorium. "Hey, if he doesn't want you, I'll take you." Silence. Total, absolute, reality-breaking silence. Then laughter. Oh, it wasn't polite laughter. It was full-on, hysterical. What is wrong with this lunatic laughter? Someone actually clapped. Rude. I stood up anyway. My philosophy has always been simple. If you're going to ruin your reputation, you might as well fully commit to the bit. I walked down the aisle like it was my own personal runway, ignoring the terrified whispers of my classmates and the very real possibility that campus security was about to tackle me into the linoleum. Julian was still kneeling on the stage. He was still holding the ring, still processing the emotional equivalent of getting hit by a freight train. I walked up the stairs, stopped directly in front of him, and looked down. Up close, he was even worse. Sharp, aristocratic features, eyes as cold and gray as a winter storm. It was the kind of face that could ruin lives, and probably had. Nice. I reached out and grabbed his wrist. His skin was cold, firm, and buzzing with tension. "Get up," I ordered. He didn't move. So, I pulled. Now he moved. Good, responsive. I liked that. He stood up slowly, towering over me, and finally looked at me properly. His eyes narrowed just a fraction, assessing the sheer audacity standing in front of him. "What?" he demanded. He speaks, encouraging. Date me instead, I said. Simple, direct, efficient. His expression didn't change, which was honestly impressive. If some random guy in a cheap graduation gown grabbed my wrist in front of 3,000 people and proposed a relationship swap, I'd at least blink twice. I'm not rich, I added cheerfully, glancing down at the multi-million-dollar diamond still clutched in his hand. But you won't mind, right? Behind me, I could feel it, a heavy physical weight on the back of my neck. It was Silas's gaze, sharp, curious, watching. Oh, the untouchable angel was definitely interested now. Good. Audience engagement matters. Julian stared at me for a long, agonizing moment. It was long enough that someone in the front row nervously coughed again. Long enough that this could have spiraled into an incredibly awkward disaster. But then, something in Julian's eyes shifted. It wasn't soft. It wasn't warm. It was just different. Like the heavy locks on a vault door clicking open just a fraction of an inch. Fine, Julian said. Oh, that was fast. The remaining laughter in the hall died instantly. Dead, suffocating silence returned. Round 2. Somewhere in the back, someone dropped their phone, or possibly their sanity. I smiled. Great, I said, acting like this was a completely normal exchange between two mentally stable members of society. I let go of his wrist. He didn't step back. Interesting. Very interesting. Behind us, Silas was still watching. He wasn't upset and he wasn't angry. He was just calculating, analyzing. Yeah, that was definitely going to be a problem later. But that was future Asher's issue. Present Asher had already made a decision. A terrible, life-altering decision. The kind of choice you make when you're bored, overly curious, and possibly just a little bit unhinged. I turned slightly, glancing at the shocked audience, then looked back at Julian. Come on, I said, gesturing toward the exit. You can finish your dramatic brooding moment in the car. He didn't argue. Another red flag. I liked him already. And just like that, the graduation ceremony was entirely ruined. A public scandal was beautifully achieved. My relationship status was catastrophically updated. And me? I had just willingly adopted a billionaire problem. Here is a fun fact about human psychology. When you publicly adopt a sociopathic billionaire in front of your entire graduating class, people tend to talk. By the time I woke up the next morning, I had 17 missed calls, 42 unread messages, 3 marriage proposals from strangers online, none from Julian, sadly, and one very polite, very long email from my academic advisor asking if I was experiencing a mental health crisis. Rude. Anyway, none of that mattered because I had a boyfriend now. A very rich, very intense, and very possibly dangerous boyfriend, and like any responsible, completely sane partner, I decided to show up at his house uninvited. Let me describe Julian Vance's house to you. Actually, no. Calling it a house is an insult to architecture. It was a fortress, a heavily guarded compound, hidden behind towering iron gates and dense trees. It was the kind of place where even the oxygen felt like it had a net worth. I was stopped at the entrance, obviously. Do you have an appointment, sir? The private security guard asked, looking at me like I was a piece of trash that had blown in from the highway. No. Then you can't enter. I'm his boyfriend, I stated. Pause. The guard looked at me. I looked back. Confidence is the skeleton key to the universe. I was technically lying, but also technically telling the truth. After a tense radio exchange, the gates slowly swung open. Honestly, the fact that they let me in said way more about Julian's bizarre instructions than it did about my persuasion skills. Julian was in the massive, violently minimalist living room when I walked in. Of course he was. He was sitting on a stark white sofa, looking like he belonged on a magazine cover titled Emotionally Unavailable but Expensive. He didn't look surprised to see me. That was his first mistake. You're here, he said. His voice was flat, calm, like I was a FedEx package he had signed for. Good morning to you too, I replied, tossing my jacket onto a nearby chair and dropping onto his pristine couch like I paid the mortgage. You didn't text, he observed, his gray eyes locking onto me. I don't need to report my movements. Oh, I like this game. Julian didn't smile, but his jaw tightened. Wrong answer. His eyes flicked up and down my frame, sharp, interested, dangerous. It was kind of cute. From now on, you text me when you wake up. Julian instructed, his voice dropping into a tone that probably made his employees cry. I pulled out my phone, feigning boredom. What? And when you eat? I stared at him. And when you get home? You're serious, I said, a slow grin spreading across my face. Very. Another pause. This one was heavier, measured. I could practically hear the gears turning in his head, trying to decide whether to have his security throw me off the property or keep me around as a fascinating psychological study. Good. Think about it, Julian commanded. I don't do that, I replied finally, mocking his authoritative tone. Classic. I leaned back into the cushions, completely relaxed in the lion's den. Sure you do, he countered smoothly. I don't. You will. And why is that? I tilted my head, smiling just enough to show teeth. Because I said so. Silence. God, I love a good silence. It makes everything so much more cinematic. Julian stood up. He was tall, rigidly controlled, and built to intimidate. He walked slowly across the imported rug and stopped right in front of where I was sitting. Most normal people would be sweating right now. I am not most people. You're very bold, Julian murmured, looking down at me. I'm very committed, I corrected. To what? I looked him dead in the eye. To you. That did something. It wasn't an obvious reaction. There was no gasp, no flinch. But I saw it. A microscopic crack in his perfect porcelain mask. It was small, but it was real. He didn't step back. He didn't look away. He didn't reject the claim. Progress. Here's the thing, Julian. People think I'm joking. I'm not. I don't say things I don't mean. If I say I'll take you, I take you. Simple as that. I slapped my hands on my knees and stood up, brushing past him. Have you eaten breakfast? I have staff for that. Yeah, but I don't trust them. You don't trust them? Julian repeated, turning to watch me. I don't trust anyone except me, I said cheerfully, wandering toward what I assumed was the kitchen. It was. Obviously. Everything in his house was exactly where you'd expect it to be. Organized, controlled, sterile, predictable, disgusting. I opened his massive stainless steel refrigerator. It was full of expensive, perfectly prepped meals that looked emotionally empty. Tragic. You eat like a man who has never felt joy, I called out over my shoulder. I eat to function, he replied dryly from the doorway. That's so sad. I'm not interested in your opinion, Asher. You will be. A pause. Then why are you here? I glanced back at him over the refrigerator door. Because, I said, and that question mattered. Because I'm going to be around for a very long time. I said it simply. No jokes. No sarcasm. Just absolute, terrifying truth. He went quiet again, but this silence was different. It was less defensive, more thoughtful. We were getting somewhere. By the time I finished making breakfast, an actual hot meal, you're welcome. He had eaten the whole plate, checked his phone twice, and looked at me like I was either a massive liability or the exact solution he needed. I hadn't decided which one I was yet. Probably both. As I was leaving the compound an hour later, I reached out and grabbed his wrist again. Same as yesterday. Consistency is key when training a billionaire. Text me, I demanded. Julian looked down at my hand, gripping his wrist, then up at my face. You're serious about this, obviously. This isn't just a game to you to humiliate Silas. No, a beat. Then quieter. Why? There it is. The real question. Not what are you doing, but why me? I smiled. It wasn't a big joking grin. It was just enough to show him I saw right through the expensive suits and the icy demeanor. Because you looked like you needed someone to ruin your life, I said softly. And I'm very, very good at that. Silence. Then, something dark and dangerous flickered in his gray eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't rejection. It was something far worse. Interest. You might regret that, Julian warned quietly. I grinned. I don't regret anything. That was a lie, by the way. But he didn't need to know that yet. I walked out of his mansion like my name was on the deed. I didn't look back because I didn't need to. I could feel it. That magnetic shift. That pull. That very specific moment where someone realizes this might be the biggest mistake of their life, but they violently want it anyway. By noon, my phone buzzed. Just one message. Julian. Julian ate lunch. I stared at the screen for a full 5 seconds. Then, I smiled. He was hooked. Completely. And honestly, so was I. Dating Julian Vance is a deeply unique experience. It is not because he is richer than God. It is not because he has the jawline of a Greek statue. It isn't even because he has the emotional bandwidth of a beautifully dressed brick. No, it is because Julian treats modern dating like a high-stakes military security operation. Day 3, I woke up, stretched languidly in my messy bed, and reached for my phone. 3 unread messages. Julian, 7:01 a.m. Where are you? 7:05 a.m. You didn't text this morning. Julian, 7:08 a.m. Are you safe? Answer. I stared at the glowing screen. Then I checked the current time at the top corner. 7:10 a.m. I smiled. Oh, he's learning so fast. Here is the fundamental truth about Julian. He doesn't know how to say, I care about you. He says, where are you? Why didn't you answer my text in 60 seconds? Send me your live location. Romantic, right? To normal, well-adjusted people, absolutely not. To me, utterly adorable, because I get it. I really do. When you grow up with access to everything in the world except genuine affection, you learn how to love incorrectly. For Julian, love equals monitoring, control, making absolutely certain nothing unexpected happens. Because if he can control the environment, people don't leave him. It's simple logic, applied through a terrible method, backed by understandable reasoning. And me? Oh, I understand him perfectly, which is exactly why this relationship is doomed to be spectacular. I tapped his contact name and called him. He picked up on the first half ring. Good boy. You're awake, Julian said immediately. No hello, no good morning. You're tracking my REM cycle now? I teased, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. You didn't message. It has been exactly 12 minutes since I assume you woke up based on your usual patterns. That is 12 minutes unaccounted for. I sat up in bed, genuinely impressed. Wow, you're getting worse, I said, a smile pulling at my lips. Silence on the line. You don't like it. Wrong answer. I love it. I purred, a heavy, static-filled pause, a very important pause, because that was absolutely not the reaction he was anticipating. You what? I said I love it, I repeated, throwing the blankets off and walking toward my closet. But you're doing it wrong. Wrong. It wasn't a question. It was a demand for clarification. Yeah, if you're going to be an obsessive stalker, Julian, commit to it properly. Silence. Confusion. And burning curiosity. Perfect, I hung up. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the immaculate glass lobby of Vance Industries. Uninvited. Again. The receptionist didn't even try to stop me this time. We love character growth. I walked straight past the executive assistants, pushed open the heavy oak doors, and walked directly into his private office. No knocking, no hesitation. Julian looked up from a stack of legal documents. He blinked. Once. How did you get in? I walked. That's not what I meant, Asher. I know. I dropped into the plush leather chair across from his massive desk like I owned the company. Because functionally, I kind of did now. Give me your phone, no. I held out my hand, palm up, expectant. Julian, phone. Why? I smiled sweetly. Because I said so. There it was. His own favorite line weaponized against him. He stared at me long and hard. His sharp eyes searched my face, trying to figure out the punchline to this joke. But there was no joke. Slowly, almost reluctantly, he reached into his suit jacket and handed over the sleek black device. Oh, that was way too easy. Dangerous. Very dangerous. I tapped the screen. Face recognition locked it. I simply held it up to his face. It unlocked with a soft click. Thank you very much. I opened his settings, navigated to his location services, and turned on live location sharing with my own contact, permanently. Then, I slid the phone back across the mahogany desk. There, now we're equal, I said proudly. Julian looked down at his phone, saw the glowing notification, and then looked back up at me. You're monitoring me, obviously. You just installed permanent tracking on my personal device. You were already doing it to me mentally, Julian. I just made the system more efficient. Silence. His brilliant corporate shark brain was working overtime. I could literally see the cogs turning, because this wasn't resistance I was seeing. This was pure, unadulterated adjustment. He wasn't rejecting the invasion of privacy. He was processing the meaning behind it. Why? He asked finally. Always the most important question. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my palm, locking eyes with him. Because you don't know how to love without control, I said softly. His expression remained perfectly stoic, but his eyes were so sharp, so violently focused on me, drinking in every word. And I don't know how to love without taking over, I continued, grinning. So instead of going to therapy and fixing our deep-rooted psychological issues, let's just be completely insane together. Silence. Then a slow, measured breath. It wasn't heavy or dramatic, it was just real. That shouldn't work, Julian whispered. And yet, here is the massive, glaring problem. I understand him way too well. I see it in the way his eyes track me across a room, like he's terrified I might evaporate into thin air, like he needs to keep me contained in a glass box to keep me safe. Like losing me would shatter something vital inside his chest. And I get it, I really truly do. But understanding someone's trauma doesn't make you a better person. Sometimes it just makes you a more dangerous enabler. Where are you going after this? He asked suddenly, breaking the tension. Lunch, with who? I blinked, then let a slow, wicked smile spread across my face. Oh, we're really doing this. With someone, I teased. Who? It was not a question. It was a dark, possessive demand. Cute. I stood up, walked slowly around his desk, and stopped right beside his chair. Close, very close. I could smell his expensive cologne, cedar, bergamot, and something coldly metallic. "Why do you care?" I asked softly. His jaw tightened, a muscle feathered in his cheek. "I need to know." There it is. Need. Not want, need. I reached out and slowly straightened his perfectly tied silk cravat. It was completely unnecessary, but intensely important. "You don't need to know everything," I murmured. His eyes darkened to a stormy charcoal. "Yes, I do," I laughed. I actually laughed out loud, because wow, he genuinely believed that. I leaned down, bringing my lips hovering just inches from his ear. "Then you should have picked a boyfriend who was easier to control," I whispered. A sharp pause. His breath hitched. Then I pulled back, smiling brightly, sunny, and absolutely terrible. I strutted to the heavy oak door, my hand on the brass handle. "Asher?" I paused, turning my head slightly. He was watching me, intense, focused, hooked. "Send me your location," Julian commanded softly. I smirked. "Already did." I walked out. 5 minutes later, as I was walking down the bustling city sidewalk, my phone buzzed. "Julian, why are you at a cat cafe? Who are you with?" I looked at the message, looked at the empty floral chair across from me, and typed back. "Me, no one, just testing how fast you check the tracker." Pause. 3 typing dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Julian, a sip of my iced matcha." Me? Be manipulative? Obviously. Another pause, longer this time. "Julian, Asher, I do not like not knowing." There it was. The raw, unfiltered truth, bleeding through the corporate armor. I leaned back against the cafe chair, staring at the screen, my heart doing a strange, entirely unhealthy flutter. Me, good. Now you understand how I feel when you shut down and disappear. Message sent. Read at 12:42 p.m. No reply. By the time I stood up to leave the cafe, I could feel it settling deep in my bones. That shift, that pull, that very specific, toxic kind of attachment that doesn't stem from comfort or safety, but from friction, from challenge, from the thrilling realization that neither of us could fully tame the other. When I finally got home to my apartment, there was another message waiting on my lock screen. "Julian, what are you doing tonight?" I smiled, slow and immensely satisfied, my thumbs flying across the keyboard. "Me? Controlling you?" Pause. "Julian? Okay. Oh!" He's gone. He is completely, irrevocably gone. And just like that, our dynamic evolved. It didn't get healthier. It didn't get safer. It just grew stronger, more intense, and infinitely more unhinged. Possessive versus possessive. Control clashing against control. And somehow neither of us wanted to win the war. We just desperately wanted the other to stay on the battlefield, which honestly might be the worst part of all. There are many socially acceptable ways to date someone. You can go on cute little coffee dates. You can hold hands shyly under the table. You can build emotional intimacy over late-night phone calls like normal, functioning human beings. Or you can decide very calmly that the entire world needs to know, definitively and aggressively, that he is mine. Take a wild guess which route I chose. It started small. Okay, that's a lie. Nothing I do is ever small. We were attending one of Julian's stupidly expensive gala events. You know the exact type of gathering I'm talking about. Crystal chandeliers everywhere. People whispering behind champagne flutes like they're allergic to speaking above 50 decibels. Everyone dressed in haute couture like they personally own at least 2 tech startups and 1 dark family secret. I was invited, technically speaking. Emotionally speaking, I absolutely did not belong here. I walked in anyway, because where Julian Vance goes, Asher Hayes goes, obviously. He was already there, standing in the center of a circle of aging billionaires and socialites, looking like he would rather be undergoing a root canal without anesthesia, but refusing to show a single crack in his armor. He was cold. He was perfect. He was untouchable. And then his eyes shifted across the crowded ballroom and saw me. And just like that, the entire atmosphere around him fractured. It wasn't a massive cinematic reaction. But I saw it. The rigid line of his shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. His attention abruptly abandoned whatever multi-million-dollar merger they were discussing. He locked onto me like a heat-seeking missile. Oh, that's a new reaction. I smiled to myself and walked straight up to him, casually slicing right through the middle of the elite group mid-conversation. Was it rude? Intensely. Was it necessary? Absolutely. "Hi," I said brightly. Julian looked down at me. Really looked. "You're late. I like making an entrance." "You weren't announced by the door staff." "I don't need an announcement," I said, entirely unbothered. Pause. Julian's eyes swept over my outfit. "You're not dressed appropriately for a black tie gala." I glanced down at my dark silk shirt, unbuttoned 2 stops too low, and slim-fit trousers, casual, comfortable, and completely, scandalously out of place among the sea of tuxedos. Perfect. I look incredible, I corrected him. He didn't argue. Growth. One of the older, silver-haired investors in the group cleared his throat loudly, visibly irritated by the interruption. Mr. Vance, as we were discussing regarding the offshore. No, you weren't. You were boring him, I cut in smoothly, flashing the old man a dazzling, predatory smile. Silence, delicious, suffocating, intensely awkward silence, the kind of silence where millions of dollars of social capital hang by a thread. Julian didn't stop me. He didn't apologize for me. He just watched me. That is exactly how you know things are getting terrifyingly serious. A younger, heavily perfumed woman in the circle tried next, eyeing me up and down with barely concealed disdain. Excuse me, but who exactly is this? I didn't even look at her. I just reached out, grabbed Julian firmly by the lapels of his immaculate tuxedo jacket, and pulled him down slightly. His boyfriend, I announced clearly, and then I kissed him. It wasn't a polite, chaste peck. It was quick, yes, but it was deep, casual, and utterly possessive. I kissed him like it was the most mundane, routine action in the world. The silence returned, but this time it was deafening. I'm starting to think I caused that reaction a lot. I released his lapels and looked around the circle. Yeah, everyone was staring, shocked, deeply confused, slightly horrified. Good. The system was working exactly as intended. Julian straightened up slowly. I watched his face with forensic precision. This part was crucial. This was the precipice where most powerful men would push me away, assert their dominance, get angry, and re-establish their control over the narrative. Julian didn't. He just looked down at me. His gray eyes were darker, sharper, and so much more awake than they had been 3 minutes ago. "What are you doing, Asher?" he murmured, his voice a low rumble meant only for me. I smiled innocently. "Fixing your public image, my image. You're way too intimidating. People think you're a robot. Unapproachable. I am unapproachable." "Not anymore." I reached out and tapped him lightly over the heart. "Now you're taken. Pause. That is not better. It is for me. We move through the rest of the event like that." Or, more accurately, I moved. Julian followed. It is an extremely important distinction. Someone approached, trying to trap Julian into a conversation about real estate. "Ah, Julian, I've been meaning to catch you." "No, he's busy," I said, bodily stepping between them. "Busy with what?" the man asked. Bewildered. With me. Simple, clear, devastatingly accurate. A bit later, an overly eager young heir got a little too friendly. He was laughing too loud at Julian's dry responses, smiling too widely, and standing just a few inches too deep into Julian's personal space. I did not like that, so I reached out again, hooked my index finger right into the knot of Julian's bow tie, and tugged him backward, flush against my side. "Don't talk to him. Talk to me," I commanded the heir. The guy blinked rapidly, looking past my shoulder at Julian, waiting. Surely, the great Julian Vance would say something. He would put this chaotic interloper in his place. Julian stared at the heir with dead, shark-like eyes. "Talk to him," Julian echoed. Oh, that was new. I looked up at Julian, slightly stunned. He wasn't smiling. He never really smiles in public. But there was a minute twitch at the corner of his mouth. Something reactive, something wildly alive. That did something to my chest. Here is the absolute core of the issue. Julian used to micromanage everything. Every single conversation, every social interaction, every possible business outcome. It was all a chessboard to him. Now he was willfully letting me sweep the pieces off the board. He was letting me take over, not because I overpowered him, not because he couldn't stop me with a single word. He let me do it because he wanted me to. That is the difference. That is the deeply dangerous part. Suddenly, from across the crowded ballroom, I felt it, a gaze so heavy and sharp it felt like a physical touch. I turned my head slightly, scanning the crowd. There he was, Silas Thorne, of course, always watching from the periphery. Silas looked different tonight. He didn't look upset. He didn't look regretful about throwing away the proposal. He just looked analytical, like he was trying to solve a complex algebraic equation that was missing a variable. His striking eyes flicked rapidly between me and Julian, back and forth, comparing the data. He was looking at me, loud, shameless, dressed entirely wrong, and completely out of control. Then he looked at Julian, quieter, reactive, tethered, following instead of leading. And yeah, I get why that broke Silas's brain. It didn't make sense on paper. I caught Silas's eye and smiled at him. It was a friendly, excessively bright, and entirely provocative smile. Silas did not smile back, but his gaze narrowed. pure, unadulterated interest. I leaned closer to Julian's ear, brushing my lips against his jawline. "Your ex is staring at us," I murmured. Julian didn't even look up. "I know. Do you care?" "No," I hummed softly. "Good. Then stay still." Just because I could, just because I knew Silas was watching, I kissed Julian again. This time it was slower, hotter. It still wasn't technically violating public indecency laws, but it was a heavy, undeniable act of territorial claiming. Julian's breath hitched and his hand came up, wrapping warmly around my waist to steady me. When I finally pulled back, I didn't look at Julian. I looked straight over his shoulder, dead into Silas's eyes. I held his gaze and offered a slow, wicked smirk. Message received, untouchable angel. Julian's hand flexed on my waist. He wasn't stopping me. He wasn't pushing me away for making a scene. He was just holding me, grounding me, responding to the madness. And that is when the reality of our situation finally clicked into place for me. It wasn't about the chaos. It wasn't about who held the leash in the relationship. It wasn't about the fact that we were both walking, talking red flags. No, it was something quieter and vastly more terrifying. Julian is changing, and he is doing it exclusively for me. Hours later, as we were finally escaping the stifling gala, I grabbed the lapels of his jacket one more time, pulling him down in the dimly lit parking garage. "You did very well today," I praised softly. "Did I?" "Yeah." Julian looked down at me, the shadows of the garage carving deep angles into his face. "How?" I smiled, tapping his chest. "You listened to me," a long, heavy pause. "I don't listen to people, Asher." "I know," I whispered back. "You listen to me." Silence. The beautiful part? He didn't even try to deny it. I let go of his jacket, turned on my heel, and started walking toward the waiting town car. Naturally, I led the way. Because I lead, he follows. That is our established ecosystem now. But behind us, echoing in the back of my mind, I could still feel the phantom weight of Silas Thorne's stare. It lingered, heavy, unresolved. And honestly, good. Let him watch. Let him stay up at night and wonder. Let him try to decipher why Julian Vance, the most rigidly controlled man on the planet, looks 1,000 times more alive with a chaotic disaster like me than he ever did with perfection. Because the answer is horrifyingly simple. I don't try to fix Julian. I don't try to soften his edges. I don't try to make him a better person. I just make him mine. And apparently that is exactly what he's been starving for. There are recognized, healthy stages in every romantic relationship. Normal people experience things like the getting to know you phase, building mutual trust, establishing boundaries, and utilizing healthy, open communication. Julian and I skipped absolutely all of that, obviously. We bypassed the honeymoon phase and drove 90 miles an hour straight into mutual surveillance. Now before you judge me, actually, you know what? Go ahead and judge me. I entirely deserve it. But also, objectively speaking, I am right. It started with small things. Harmless, little, cute things, like randomly calling Julian in the middle of his workday. At first, he didn't pick up immediately. I found this deeply disappointing. So I took it upon myself to correct the behavior. Day 1 of training, I dial his number. Ring, 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 click. What is it? Julian's voice was brisk, distracted, too slow. "Why did it take you 4 rings to answer my call?" "I was in the middle of a board meeting, Asher." "Excuse me?" I said, offended. Silence on the line. "You're serious, dead serious." Pause. A heavy sigh. "I will call you back when the meeting is adjourned." "No, you will not," I snapped cheerfully. "I am currently eating a bagel, and that is vastly more important than your Q3 profit margins." Silence. Absolute, baffled silence, then softly, "Yes, I suppose it is." "Oh, that was way too easy." Day 3. I dialed his number. Click. "I'm here." Julian answered immediately on the first half ring. "Perfect. Progress," I praised. After mastering phone calls, we moved on to text messaging. I decided to upgrade the security system. Me, "Where are you right now?" Julian, "At the office." Me, "Unacceptable." Send photographic proof. Pause. 2 minutes later, my phone pinged with a photo of his expansive mahogany desk, his expensive Patek Philippe watch prominently displayed on his wrist in the frame. Me, "Good, very good. Now, here is where things escalate from eccentric to probably illegal. Permanent location tracking was inevitable. Let's not pretend otherwise. I already had a live feed of his GPS coordinates bouncing to my phone 24/7. That was basic, beginner level, child's play. So naturally, my brain conjured a new thought. What if I could know more? Before you ask, yes, I have certain technical skills. No, I will not elaborate on how I acquired them. Yes, they are highly legally questionable. And no, I do not feel a single ounce of remorse. The first camera installation was Accidental, kind of. I was lounging at his compound, completely unsupervised. Being fully trusted in a billionaire's mansion is a very dangerous combination for someone like me. Julian had to step into his study for a confidential video call. Left to my own devices, I looked around the massive, echoing living space. It was too big. There were too many blind spots, unacceptable security risks everywhere, so I fixed it. I ordered a micro-lens camera with overnight shipping and installed it inside the hollow base of a hideous modern art sculpture in the corner of the room. It was subtle, elegant, true artistry. Did I explicitly tell Julian about it? No. Should I have? Also no. The second camera, placed discreetly in the hallway, completely intentional. The third, mounted flawlessly above the kitchen island, inspired. By the end of the week, let's just say I had comprehensive, multi-angle coverage of the common areas. Now, any sane narrative would dictate that this is the moment where everything violently blows up. This is where he finds out, flies into a terrifying rage, orders his security to throw me onto the street, and immediately files a restraining order. That would be the logical progression of events. But as we have established, Julian and I do not participate in logic. He found out. Of course he found out. It's Julian Vance. The man notices when the thermostat fluctuates by half a degree. A tiny blinking red light wasn't going to escape him forever. I was sitting cross-legged on his pristine white sofa, eating grapes, when he walked through the front door. He was calm. Way too calm. He walked slowly across the room, holding a small, black metallic object between his index finger and thumb. Camera number 2. Rest in peace, little buddy. Julian stopped directly in front of me and held it up to eye level. Explain, he commanded. I chewed a grape slowly, looked at the crushed lens, looked up at his freezing gray eyes, looked back at the camera. It's a new minimalist decoration, I lied effortlessly. Silence. You installed covert surveillance equipment inside my house, Julian stated, his voice dangerously even. Correction, I chirped. Our house. It is not your house. It is now. A long, agonizing pause. He stared down at me. It was a hard, dissecting stare. He was trying to decide my fate. Why? He asked. Always the why. I leaned back into the cushions, making myself completely bonelessly relaxed. I needed to show zero fear, because I like knowing where you are. That is what the GPS location tracking on my phone is for, Asher. That just tells me you're in a building. It's not enough. Not enough. Nope. Silence. The air pressure in the room shifted. You don't trust me, Julian said quietly, and for the first time there was a genuine edge of hurt under the ice. Wrong, so very wrong. I smiled softly, dropping the playful act. Julian, I don't trust the world around you. Pause. That landed. I could visibly see the impact. His stoic expression didn't change, but the micro-tensions in his jaw and shoulders relaxed. The iciness behind his eyes thawed just a fraction, and what he started, his voice dropping an octave. What exactly do you do with this unauthorized information? Oh, that's the interesting part. I swung my legs off the sofa and stood up. I walked slowly into his space, stopping so close I could feel the heat radiating off his chest. Do you really want the honest answer? I whispered, tilting my head up to look him in the eye. Julian swallowed hard. Yes, I smiled. I watch you. Silence. Heavy, charged, suffocatingly intimate silence. If anyone else in the world heard that, they would be profoundly disturbed. They would be calling the police. They would be running for their lives. Julian? He didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He didn't tell me I was a monster and to get out. What do you see when you watch me? He asked softly, a terrifying curiosity bleeding into his tone, and that was the exact moment I knew I owned his soul, completely. I see you working until 3 a.m. when you promised me you'd sleep, I murmured, reaching out to trace the lapel of his suit. I see you skipping meals because you're too focused on destroying your competitors. I see you staring blankly at your phone screen, like you're waiting for the world to end. I paused, letting my hand slide up to rest against his warm neck. My voice dropped to a near whisper. I see you alone. Silence. The hand holding the crushed camera twitched. His grip on the broken plastic tightened until his knuckles turned white. And that is why you did this? He asked thickly. Partly. What is the other reason? I smiled. It was bright, sunny, and absolutely, fundamentally terrible. Because you're mine. There it is. The fatal line. The twisted truth. The core of our shared problem. Julian exhaled a long, shaky breath. He looked down at the broken camera in his palm, then back up into my eyes. He didn't yell. He didn't pull away. Instead, he turned to the glass coffee table and gently set the broken camera down. He didn't throw it in the trash. He didn't crush it further. He just laid it to rest at me, his eyes burning with a dark, consuming heat. "Show me where the other ones are," Julian ordered softly. "Oh no. Oh yes." I grinned like a maniac. Here is a deeply unexpected plot twist. Julian Vance changed. Now, do not get overly excited. He did not completely reinvent his personality. He is still intensely overbearing, ruthlessly controlling, and fully capable of ruining a man's livelihood with a single phone call. But the flavor of his control shifted. Now, instead of demanding, he asks, "What are you doing today? Can I see you tonight? Did you eat enough for lunch? Are you wearing a jacket?" That is emotional development. It is also terrifying to witness in real time. The very first time Julian said the word please, I practically threw myself across the room to press the back of my hand against his forehead. "You're sick," I declared loudly. "Call an ambulance." Julian batted my hand away, scowling. "I am perfectly healthy. You just said please. That is completely unnatural for your species. You have a brain tumor." Silence. His scowl deepened into something resembling a pout. "You do not like it when I am polite." I blinked in shock. Then I burst out laughing. "I love it. Pause." That familiar, calculating pause while his brain updated its social algorithms. Good. He genuinely listens to me now. That is an entirely new phenomenon in the Vance universe. If I tell him to eat, he eats. If I tell him to close his laptop and sleep, he sleeps. If I demand he come to me across a crowded room, he abandons millionaires mid-sentence and comes. Which naturally, inevitably, made my own behavior so much worse, because here is the psychological trap. When someone hands you total control and implicitly trusts you not to shatter them, you have two choices. You either become a responsible, nurturing partner, or you double down on the madness. Guess which path I sprinted down. I bought more cameras. I upgraded the feeds to 4K resolution. I optimized the blind spots. We had the house fully wired, and Julian knew about all of them. Fully. Completely. There were no more secrets, no more lies, no more hidden motives. Just a deeply unsettling mutual understanding that our dynamic was not normal. At all. "You added another lens in the east hallway," Julian noted one evening, casually sipping a glass of scotch while reading a dossier. "Two lenses," I corrected from my spot on the rug, scrolling through my iPad. Pause. Julian slowly lowered the dossier. "Why two? Different focal angles. The lighting by the portrait was washing out your face." Silence. A small, almost imperceptible nod. "Of course, carry on, and yet—" He never stops me. He never unplugs the routers. He never tells me I've crossed a line. Instead, his brain adapts to the panopticon. He thrives in it. He texts more often. He calls back instantly. He volunteers his location itinerary for the week before I even have to threaten him for it. And he does it not because I demand it anymore, but because he genuinely wants to. That is the fundamental difference. "Julian, I am stepping into a board meeting." Attach, a selfie showing the boardroom doors. I smiled at my phone. Me, I didn't ask. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Julian, I know. Oh, that is so incredibly dangerous." Julian feels loved when he is monitored. I can see it. I can feel it in the air between us. I can tell by the way he looks at me now. The gaze is no longer guarded. It isn't distant or calculating. It is anchored, heavy, devoted. He looks at me like I am the only solid object in a world made of shifting sand. Like I am something permanent, something deeply, inherently his. Which is hysterically funny because from an outside perspective, I am officially the bigger red flag in this relationship, not him, me. Julian used to rule people through fear and financial leverage. Now I control him openly, shamelessly, and lovingly, and he eagerly hands me the leash. No, he practically forces the leash into my hand and begs me not to let go. "You are getting worse," Julian murmured one night as we lay in bed, my fingers idly tracing patterns on his chest while I checked the hallway camera feeds on my phone. I smiled into the darkness, not looking away from the screen. "You love it?" A long, quiet pause. I felt his chest rise and fall beneath my palm. "I do," he confessed into the quiet room. Yeah, that right there is the core of the issue. We didn't magically fix each other. Our love didn't heal our deep psychological wounds. We didn't suddenly become better, healthier people. We simply found someone whose specific brand of brokenness perfectly interlocked with our own twisted version of love. A love that is intense, paranoid, and more than a little suffocating. And we looked at that mess, held hands, and decided, this is enough. So now he checks in obsessively. I monitor relentlessly. He listens strictly. I control utterly. We are perfectly balanced in a completely unbalanced, terrifying way. And honestly, I have never felt more in control of my life, or more desperately attached to another human being, which is probably a terrible sign for my future, but at this point, catastrophic life choices are kind of my signature aesthetic. There are many clear, quantifiable signs that a romantic relationship is thriving. For example, your notoriously icy boyfriend smiles more frequently. He initiates physical contact. He texts you first. He stops treating human emotions like a hostile cyber attack on his central nervous system. All great milestones. We love that character development for us. However, there is also a very specific, undeniable sign that things in your relationship are going a little too well, and that sign is when your boyfriend's stunningly beautiful ex-fiancé starts staring at you from across rooms like you just stole his life savings. In my defense, I kind of did. It started subtly, which is genuinely impressive, considering Silas Thorne. Silas is not a subtle creature by nature. He is the kind of ethereal, magnetic person who walks into a room and accidentally ruins three people's self-esteem just by existing in their peripheral vision. He is annoying like that. First, the encounters were just coincidental, convenient, highly suspicious. Julian and I would be at a quiet, absurdly expensive cafe. Silas would be at the corner table, reading a book. Julian and I would attend a charity art auction. Silas would be lingering by the abstract sculptures. Julian and I would be existing, breathing oxygen in a public space. Silas was statistically guaranteed to be standing exactly 30 feet away. "Your ex is stalking us," I stated one Tuesday afternoon, casually sipping my iced Americano. Julian was reviewing a contract on his tablet. He didn't even look up. "He isn't. He is." "No," I paused, chewing on my straw. "Turn around. Why? Just do it, Julian. Humor my delusions." Julian sighed. "This is another piece of progress, by the way." He sighs now. He expresses exasperation instead of executing people. He turned his head slightly, glancing over his shoulder, a beat of silence. "He's sitting by the window," Julian observed flatly. "I know." Silence. Julian turned back to his tablet, unbothered. "How long has he been sitting there?" "Long enough for it to be a psychological concern. Short enough for it to still be highly entertaining to me." Here is the most fascinating thing about Silas. He never interrupts. He never approaches. He never causes a scene or throws a drink in my face. He just sits there and watches, and generally speaking, I do not mind being watched. I consider myself a highly entertaining individual, but this specific brand of staring wasn't just idle curiosity anymore. This was forensic analysis, because Julian had changed and Silas had finally noticed. Julian used to be cold, rigid, and emotionally locked in a vault, all wrapped up in premium, billionaire packaging. With Silas, Julian was a manager, a warden. With me, Julian laughs. It isn't a loud, boisterous laugh. It happens rarely, but he does laugh, and every single time he does, I feel a rush of dopamine, like I just unlocked a platinum achievement in a wildly difficult video game. "Say that again," I had told him once after a particularly dry, sarcastic comment left his lips. "No, you smiled, Julian." "Admit it, I did not." "You did. Your face moved. I have the camera footage to prove it." Silence, a twitch of the lips. "Maybe." I grinned, triumphant. "Good boy, that specific moment, that exact microscopic softening of the terrifying Julian Vance, Silas saw it. I knew he saw it because, well, I noticed absolutely everything. We were sitting across from each other in a VIP lounge. Julian was slightly relaxed, leaning back into the leather couch, a rare, highly collectible moment of peace. I was sitting next to him, obviously radiating chaotic sunshine, and standing behind Julian's line of sight, lingering near the bar, was Silas, still as a statue, watching. He didn't look upset, he didn't look angry that I was sitting where he used to sit. He just looked quiet, contemplative. I leaned slightly to the side, catching Silas's gaze over Julian's shoulder. I held his stare. I smiled. It was a friendly, utterly unapologetic, challenging smile. Silas didn't look away. He didn't flinch. He just kept watching, and that is when the final puzzle piece clicked into place in my head. Oh, this is a new genre of problem. Because that look in Silas's beautiful eyes, that wasn't an "I regret rejecting him at graduation" look. It wasn't an "I want Julian back" look. No, it was something far more complicated, far more twisted, and infinitely more annoying to deal with. That look said, "I want what you have." I sat back in my chair, openly studying the ex-fiancé now. Julian noticed the shift in my attention. He always notices. "Stop staring at him, Asher," Julian murmured, not looking up from his phone. "I'm not staring. You are projecting a hole through the side of his head. I am observing. It's science. That is worse, probably." I leaned forward again, resting my chin in my hands. Eyes locked on Silas in the distance. Julian, do you think he misses you? I asked casually. No, oh, a pause. Do you miss him? No. Immediate, flat, no hesitation, no emotional fluctuation. It was the perfect, correct answer. But I am fundamentally toxic. So I tested the structural integrity anyway. Not even a little bit? The nostalgia? No. I smiled, satisfied. Good. But Silas? Silas wasn't looking at Julian anymore. His eyes had shifted. He was looking directly at me. There it is, the plot twist of the century. I raised my hand and offered a sarcastic, fluttering little wave. Silas didn't wave back. Rude. Later that afternoon, the inevitable finally happened. He approached. It took him long enough to build the nerve. Julian had stepped away to take an encrypted phone call regarding an acquisition, which unfortunately left me unattended in the hotel lobby. A rare and highly volatile situation. Silas materialized from the crowd and stopped quietly in front of my armchair. Up close, he was infuriatingly perfect. Calm, composed, smelling like expensive white tea and arrogance. You seem very dedicated to this, Silas said smoothly, his voice like velvet. Oh, we're skipping the small talk. Love it. I smiled warmly, crossing one leg over the other. I am, to him obviously, a calculated pause. Silas tilted his head, his ethereal hair catching the lobby light. Do you trust him, Asher? There is that universally adored question again. Why is everyone so obsessed with trust? No, I answered immediately. Easy. Completely true. Silas blinked, surprised by the honesty. Then a small, sharp, immensely satisfied smile curved his lips. Interesting, isn't it? And yet, Silas prompted softly. And yet, I echoed cheerfully. Offering nothing. Silence stretched between us. Silas studied my face. He didn't look at me the way Julian does, intensely, like he wants to consume me whole. Silas's gaze was precise, measured, surgical. Like a mechanic, trying to figure out exactly which gear was stripped in a broken engine. You're very different from what I expected, Silas observed. I get that a lot. It's the trauma. He's different now, too, Silas added, his voice dropping slightly. Julian, now we're finally getting to the thesis statement. I leaned back into the velvet armchair, lacing my fingers together. Yeah, he is. Because of you. It wasn't framed as a question. It was a factual statement, tinged with something bitter. I smiled. A slow, deliberate, wildly arrogant smile. Maybe. Silas's gaze shifted slightly. He wasn't looking toward the hallway where Julian disappeared. He was looking inward, thinking, calculating the odds, adjusting his worldview. And then, right there in the lobby, I saw the exact moment the switch flipped inside him. It wasn't visible on the surface, but the energy changed. Silas looked back down at me, and the curiosity in his eyes had mutated into something dark, something greedy. Oh no. Because I recognized that specific look. I've seen it in the mirror. I've felt it in my own chest. I've weaponized it myself. It is the hyper-specific look that screams. I didn't care about this toy when it was sitting on the shelf, but now that someone else is playing with it, I desperately want it. I tilted my head, keeping my smile perfectly bright, friendly, and dripping with awareness. Is there a problem, Silas? I asked politely. Silas didn't answer. He didn't react defensively. He just looked at me for a long, lingering second, his eyes tracing the line of my jaw, then flicking up to my hair. For the first time since graduation, I saw the entire picture clearly. It wasn't leftover love for Julian. It wasn't regret for rejecting the diamond ring. It was pure, unadulterated jealousy. But he wasn't jealous of me for having Julian. He was jealous of Julian for having me. Well, that is incredibly unfortunate for him. Because here is the brutal reality of the universe. You can want things. You can regret throwing things away. You can even launch elaborate schemes to try and take things back. But me? I am a completely different breed of monster. I do not return what I have already claimed as mine. Silas's gaze lingered just a second longer than was socially acceptable. Then he offered a soft, exceedingly polite, deeply dangerous smile. I see, Silas said quietly. That tone? Yeah, I really don't like that tone. Then he simply turned around and walked away, just like that. No theatrical drama, no screaming confrontation, no causing a scene in the lobby, which made it infinitely worse. Because loud, chaotic people like me, we're obvious, we broadcast our insanity. You can see us coming from a mile away with warning sirens blaring. But quiet people like Silas, the untouchable angels, they wait. They overthink in silence. They make quiet decisions in the dark. And when they finally decide to strike, it is never, ever random. I watched his retreating back until he disappeared into the crowd. Then I let out a long, slow exhale and let my head fall back against the armchair. Well, I muttered to the ceiling, that's a fun new complication. A minute later, Julian strode back into the lobby, sliding his phone into his pocket. He stopped in front of me, instantly reading the minute shift in my posture. "What happened?" Julian demanded, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the perimeter. I smiled perfectly angelic. "Nothing, pause." Julian's jaw locked. "You are lying to my face, Asher. Obviously." "What did Silas want?" Julian pressed, his voice dropping into that terrifying, authoritative register. I tilted my head, still smiling that bright, careless, overly aware smile. "He wants something he can't have," I said casually, and then I looked straight up into Julian's dark gray eyes. "You, silence." Julian's expression didn't shatter. He didn't gasp or react wildly, but I saw the tension instantly snap across his shoulders. I saw the sudden, violent spike of predatory awareness flare in his eyes. Good. Because the game board was just flipped over, things were about to get exceptionally violent, and honestly, I love a little chaos, especially when it comes with severe emotional consequences. There are numerous ways to begin your morning. You can wake up naturally to the sunlight streaming through the blinds. You can check your phone for notifications. You can sip coffee and question your life choices. Or, alternatively, you can wake up tightly bound to a wooden chair in an unfamiliar, dimly lit room. Personally, I do not recommend the latter. The lumbar support on this chair was absolutely atrocious. I opened my eyes slowly. Blink. Blink again. A cracked plaster ceiling, water stains, dust motes dancing in a single shaft of light. Well, that's a new ceiling. That is never a positive omen. My first conscious thought, where the hell am I? My second thought, why can't I feel my fingertips? My third thought, oh, this is going to be incredibly fun to explain to Julian. I looked down. My wrists were tightly bound to the armrests with thick, abrasive rope. I inspected the bindings closely. Neat work. Clean, symmetrical knots. Highly efficient. Someone had watched a YouTube tutorial. I wiggled my wrists subtly. The rope bit into my skin, securing me tightly, but there was a minuscule amount of give. Not impossible to escape. Good to know. I leaned my head back as far as the terrible chair allowed and sighed loudly into the empty room. "Okay, which one of you is it?" I called out to the shadows. Silence. So rude. Then, the sound of footsteps. They weren't hurried or panicked. They were slow. Unhurried. Maddeningly composed. Honestly, I already knew the answer before he stepped out of the shadows. Silas Thorne. Obviously. Who else in my life has the audacity to kidnap someone politely? Silas stepped into the shaft of light, looking like he had just strolled out of a high-end fashion editorial. He was wearing a soft cashmere sweater, looking completely calm. Too calm. He looked like he had just finished reading a chapter of a classic novel, not like he was actively committing a Class B felony. I blinked at him, then looked down at the ropes, then looked back up at his flawless face. "Did you kidnap me?" I asked, genuinely seeking clarification. Yes, no hesitation, no stuttering denial. No shameful averting of the eyes. I nodded slowly, digesting the sheer insanity of the situation. "Okay." A long pause. "Why?" I asked, my tone conversational. "I just like to have clarity on the motive before the screaming starts." Silas stood a few feet away, studying my face carefully. It was like he was trying to decide exactly what percentage of honesty to dispense. "You look too happy," Silas said finally. "Ah, there it is. Classic, textbook jealousy." "I don't like that," Silas continued, his voice perfectly even, devoid of the manic edge you'd expect from an abductor. "He was mine. He was meant to be mine." A pause. Silas took a slow step closer, his beautiful eyes darkening. "Not yours." Silence hung heavy in the dusty room. I stared at him. I truly deeply looked at the man. I took in the relaxed posture, the melodic tone of his voice, the absolute, chilling lack of panic regarding his current criminal status. And then I laughed. It wasn't a nervous chuckle. It wasn't a polite, de-escalating laugh. It was a full-chested, bright, echoing, and entirely inappropriate burst of laughter. "Oh, wow!" I wheezed, throwing my head back against the wood. "You are so much worse than Julian is." Silas didn't react. He didn't flinch at the insult. He didn't aggressively demand I take it back. He just watched me laugh. "I know," Silas Innisla agreed softly. "Oh, that is deeply concerning. Because here is the critical difference. Julian Vance is a massive, towering red flag, but he is obvious about it. He is loud. You can see him coming from a mile away and make an informed decision to ruin your life. Silas? Silas is the kind of red flag that looks like a pristine white flag of surrender, right up until the exact moment you realize he is meticulously tying you to a chair in an abandoned warehouse." I tilted my head, studying him with newfound respect. "Did you plan this?" "Yes." "For how long?" "A while." "Wow." I nodded in genuine approval. "Commitment to the bit." I respect that, Silas. I really do. He still didn't smile. It was a shame, really. You're not scared, Silas observed, tilting his head, mirroring my posture. Should I be? Yes. Silas looked at the ropes. Most people would be. I considered that for a moment. I looked at the dark corners of the room, evaluated the tension in the knots, and thought about the absolute nuclear explosion currently happening wherever Julian was. No, I hummed cheerfully. Silence again. Silas walked a few steps closer, stopping just out of kicking range. He was still infuriatingly calm, still completely unbothered by the fact that he was rapidly approaching domestic terrorism territory. I wanted to understand, Silas said, his voice lowering to a conversational murmur. Understand what? Me? The knots? The real estate market? You changed him, Silas ignored my sarcasm. Julian, I want to know exactly how. The true motive. It wasn't lingering romantic love for his ex-fiancé. It wasn't even standard jealousy. It was curiosity. Possessive, obsessive, clinical curiosity, which is infinitely more dangerous. I leaned back as far as the ropes allowed. Silas, kidnapping is an extremely dramatic way to conduct an interview. You wouldn't have answered my questions honestly otherwise, he pointed out logically. He was not wrong, but it was still incredibly rude. And after you understand? I pressed, raising an eyebrow. What's step 2 of this master plan? Silas was quiet for a long moment. He stared down at me, weighing options. Then I will decide what to do next, he said vaguely. I don't like vague, Silas. Give me multiple choice options. Silas finally met my eyes. His gaze was calm, steady, and bone-chillingly unsettling. Keeping you, Silas said. Dead silence. I blinked once, twice. Then a slow, delighted grin spread across my face. Oh, you really are completely insane, I whispered. Pause. Welcome to the club. Silas didn't react to the provocation. Very consistent behavior. I'll give him high marks for emotional regulation. You truly don't seem concerned about your physical safety, Silas noted again, a flicker of genuine confusion finally breaking through his mask. I am deeply concerned about my posture, actually. You're smiling, Asher. I smile when I'm faced with terrifying psychological anomalies. It's a coping mechanism. Why? Childhood trauma. Don't worry about it. Silence. He studied me again, much longer this time. It was the look of a scientist trying to find the flaw in an impossible equation. But there was no flaw. My logic was perfectly broken. That was the fun part. Do you actually love him? Silas asked suddenly, stepping into my personal space. That question again. The universe's favorite interrogation tactic. I didn't answer immediately, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to watch Silas sweat a little bit. Why does that matter? I deflected lazily. Because he loves you. Simple. Direct. Absolute truth, I smiled. It was a softer smile this time. Less chaotic, more grounded in the terrifying reality of my life. Yeah, I murmured. I know, a muscle twitched in Silas's jaw. And you? Now that is the real million-dollar question. I tilted my head, pretending to think deeply about it, before shrugging as best as my bound shoulders would allow. I like him a lot, I said honestly. Silas's gaze sharpened into a razor blade. That is not the same thing as love. No, I agreed amicably. It's really not. Silence hung heavy between us again. Just so we are totally clear on the narrative, I added casually, you aren't trying to take him back. You're trying to figure out why he wants me instead of perfection. Silas didn't answer. He didn't argue the point. He didn't deny the accusation, which meant his brain was still frantically processing the logic. Unfortunate for him. I shifted slightly against the wooden chair, subtly testing the tension of the ropes one more time. Still tight, but definitely manageable. I had a solid 1/4 inch of slack on the left wrist now. Good. You do know Julian is actively hunting for me right now, right? I asked conversationally. Yes. You expected that? I prepared for it, did you? I grinned, showing all my teeth. Oh, Silas, this is going to be so incredibly fun to watch. Silas frowned. It was a tiny, elegant frown, but it was finally a reaction, achievement and unlocked. You are enjoying this, Silas said, sounding faintly disgusted. Of course I am. Why? I looked up at him. I really looked past the beautiful face and the cashmere sweater, right into the obsessive, broken core of him. And then I smiled, bright, sharp, and brutally honest. Because, Silas, you currently think you are in control of this situation. Silence. And that was it. That was the exact microscopic moment where the power dynamic in the room violently shifted. Just a little, just enough, because suddenly Silas wasn't just calmly observing a captive. Now he was unsure. He was second-guessing the parameters of the cage. Good. Because here is the reality Silas failed to account for. I might be tied up, restrained, and stashed in an abandoned building by a jealous ex-fiancé. But I am absolutely not trapped. And Silas just made the catastrophic mistake of assuming that I was, which means the next 20 minutes are about to get very, very violently entertaining. Kidnapped, tied to a highly uncomfortable wooden chair, and left alone in a dusty room with an emotionally compromised, aesthetically perfect ex-fiancé. Honestly, I've had worse Thursday afternoons. Silas was still standing a few feet away, watching me intently. He was thinking. Overthinking, probably. His beautiful brain was running a million calculations a second, trying to figure out why the hostage was aggressively cheerful. Meanwhile, I was busy testing the rope bindings again, subtly, casually, professionally. For strict legal liability reasons, I will clearly state the following. I did not untie myself immediately. For dramatic, cinematic reasons, I will clarify this. I absolutely could have. Growing up scraping by in a rough neighborhood and dabbling in underground street fighting teaches a person many valuable life skills. For example, how to properly take a hit to the jaw without biting your tongue off, how to run efficiently in cheap sneakers, and, most importantly, how to systematically dislocate your own thumb to slip out of a knot you probably shouldn't have been in to begin with. The knot on my right wrist, visually secure, practically sloppy. I had already secretly loosened it about 15 minutes into our little therapy session. So why was I still sitting dutifully in the chair, pretending to be a helpless victim? Simple. I was waiting for the grand finale. Silas was currently mid-existential crisis, still desperately trying to crack my psychological code and justify his criminal actions to himself. You are not reacting the way a normal person should react in this scenario, Silas stated, crossing his arms over his cashmere chest. I get that performance review a lot, I replied cheerfully. You exhibit zero fear, Silas. I am tied to a chair in a dusty room, not being audited by the IRS. You need to relax. Silence. A very annoyed, aristocratic silence, then suddenly a sound, footsteps. But these were not slow, unhurried, or polite. These were fast, heavy, violent. They echoed down the concrete hallway with the rhythm of a predator closing in on a kill. Ah, there it is, I smiled. A slow, deeply satisfied, feral grin, perfect comedic timing. The heavy metal door to the room didn't just open. It exploded inward, slamming against the concrete wall with a deafening crack that shook dust loose from the ceiling. And there he was, the man of the hour, Julian Vance. Let me paint a picture of him for you. Normally, Julian is composed. He is rigidly controlled, impeccably tailored, and terrifying in a very quiet, corporate way. Right now? Oh, absolutely not. Right now, Julian looked completely, homicidally feral. His Tom Ford suit jacket was missing. His tie was ripped loose. A lock of his perfectly styled hair had fallen across his forehead. He was breathing heavier than I had ever seen him, his chest heaving, and his eyes were freezing, violent chips of ice, locked onto me with laser precision. Asher, Julian breathed, that tone. It was a toxic cocktail of desperate relief, absolute possession, and the promise of impending murder. God, I love that sound. Hi, honey, I called out cheerfully, waving my fingers as best I could, while still tied to a chair like we were meeting for brunch. You're late. Silence. The tension in the room skyrocketed to catastrophic levels. Silas didn't jump when the door smashed open. He didn't cower. He slowly turned his head to look at his ex-fiancée, his expression remaining maddeningly, impossibly calm. Julian stepped fully into the room. His movements were slow, measured, and practically radiating a lethal aura, but there was nothing calm about him. He was a tightly coiled spring seconds away from snapping a neck. Let him go, Julian commanded. His voice was direct, freezing, and shockingly final. Silas tilted his head slightly, studying the disheveled billionaire with clinical interest. You arrived much quicker than my projections estimated, I told you. I chimed in helpfully from my wooden throne. He's highly responsive now. I've been training him with positive reinforcement. Silence. Neither of them appreciated my commentary. So rude. Silas turned his full attention back to Julian, ignoring my interruption. You used to love me, Silas said softly. The words hung in the dusty air, heavy with unspoken history. Oh, we are doing the high drama monologue now. Excellent. Not him, Silas continued, gesturing gracefully toward me. A heavy, suffocating pause. He understands you, Silas theorized. Is that it? Is that the novelty? That was a bold, probing assumption. Julian didn't hesitate. He didn't blink. He didn't look away from Silas. I love him, Julian stated. Simple, clear, immediate, zero hesitation. I blinked, genuinely surprised. Okay, wow. So we are officially saying the L word out loud in abandoned warehouses now. Good to know. Updating my emotional spreadsheet. Let him go, Silas, Julian repeated, his voice dropping into a deadly guttural register. He took another step forward, closing the distance, and that was the exact moment I decided. Okay, enough waiting. Time to shine. My love, I interrupted, my voice light, floating, almost amused. Both of the terrifying, possessive men instantly froze and snapped their attention back to me. Good. Center of attention acquired. I sighed heavily, shaking my head with exaggerated disappointment. Julian, I explicitly told you to stay away from other people. You just have terrible boundary control. Pause. I smiled. It was a bright, sweet, completely unhelpful smile. And look what it came to. Now I'm tied to a chair. Look what you made me do. Silence, a heavy, absolute, deeply confused silence filled the warehouse. Because yes, let us take a moment to objectively review the current situation. Man A, the beautiful ex, had kidnapped me and tied me to a chair. Man B, the billionaire boyfriend, had physically broken down a door to rescue me, and I, the hostage, was currently scolding my rescuer for causing the inconvenience. Priorities. Julian blinked slowly, as if his brain was struggling to buffer the data. What? Don't what me, Julian. You knew he was emotionally unstable, I accused, nodding towards Silas. I did not. You did. I suspected it. That is a legal distinction. It's the same thing, Julian. Silas was watching our bizarre domestic argument unfold. He wasn't completely calm anymore. The impenetrable mask on his face had finally cracked, revealing raw confusion beneath. Good. I leaned forward in the chair, testing the tension on my right wrist one final, decisive time. Yep. Loose. Ready. You two are absolutely exhausting. I muttered under my breath. Then I pulled, hard. My right wrist snapped forcefully against the weakened knot. The rope gave way. The loop slipped flawlessly over my bruised knuckles. Clean, easy, gone. I casually reached over and untied my left wrist in 3 seconds flat. Silence. Oh, the look on their faces. That specific silence was worth every second of back pain. I stood up slowly, rolling my shoulders and stretching my arms wide like I had just woken up from a refreshing nap on a Sunday afternoon. Finally, I groaned, rubbing my neck. My lower back was starting to scream in agony. Both Silas and Julian stared at me in horrified fascination. You untied yourself, Silas said slowly, his brain clearly malfunctioning. About 20 minutes ago, yeah. Julian's jaw dropped a fraction of an inch. Why didn't you leave? I looked at Julian, flashed a brilliant smile, then slowly turned my gaze to Silas. I was waiting, I said softly. Pause. Then I moved. Fast, clean, direct. Years of muscle memory took over in a fraction of a second. One step forward, pivot, plant the foot. Drive the kinetic energy upward. Punch. My fist connected solidly with Silas's perfectly sculpted jaw. Silas staggered backward violently, his eyes wide with shock. He completely hadn't expected the hostage to go on the offensive. Honestly, that was a disappointing lack of tactical foresight on his part. You do not get to touch what is mine, I hissed, my voice still deceptively light. I took another step, closing the gap before he could regain his balance. Another hit. A sweeping kick to the back of his knee. Not overly brutal, not lethal force, just enough to destabilize the threat. Silas stumbled, trying to recover his footing gracefully, but he was far too slow. Street fighting is a highly practical, very useful skill set. 10-10, highly recommend learning it instead of piano. Within 4 seconds, Silas was on the concrete floor. He wasn't unconscious, but he was thoroughly outmatched, clutching his bruising jaw and staring up at me in disbelief. I crouched down slightly, invading his space, looking dead into his beautiful, shocked eyes. Next time you want to understand my relationship, I whispered casually, try scheduling a Zoom call. Then I stood up, turned my back on the fallen ex-fiancé, and walked straight over to Julian. Julian hadn't moved an inch. He was standing completely frozen, watching me approach like he was seeing an entirely new, terrifying species of predator. He looked like he had just realized his boyfriend was significantly more dangerous than he was. Good. I didn't hesitate. I reached up, grabbed 2 handfuls of his expensive ruined shirt collar, for consistency's sake, and yanked him down aggressively. Close. Very close. I could feel the ragged heat of his breath against my lips. You, I whispered fiercely against his mouth, are in so much trouble. Pause. Then I kissed him. It wasn't a gentle, romantic reunion kiss. It wasn't soft. It wasn't careful. It was a violent, claiming, possessive collision of teeth and lips. It was a little too desperate, a little too much. The exact kind of kiss that broadcasts to anyone watching. He is mine. If you try to take him, I will burn your house down. When I finally pulled back, Julian's lips were slightly bruised, and his eyes were blown wide and dark. Perfect proof of concept. He was breathing entirely differently now. The rigidly controlled billionaire was gone. The man staring down at me was raw, affected, and utterly hooked. Julian reached up, his large, warm hand cupping my jaw. His thumb brushed over my cheekbone. "You're bleeding," Julian nodded quietly, his voice raspy. I touched my cheek, a tiny scratch from the chair. "Probably didn't notice. You untied yourself. You're welcome." Silence settled over us again, thick and heavy. Behind us, on the dusty floor, Silas shifted slightly, pulling himself up to a seated position. He was still there, still watching, still processing the absolute failure of his psychological experiment. I glanced back over my shoulder at the beautiful ex. My chaotic smile was completely gone. My eyes were flat, dead, and serious. "Stay away from us," I stated simply. "No jokes. No sarcastic humor. Just an absolute non-negotiable fact." Then I turned my attention back to Julian. I carefully smoothed down the lapels of his ruined suit, adjusting his collar because aesthetic priorities must be maintained even after a kidnapping. "Let's go home," I said. Julian didn't argue. He didn't hesitate. He didn't even cast a backward glance at the man he almost married. He just wrapped a heavy, protective arm around my waist, pulling me flush against his side, and steered me toward the broken door. Good, he is learning so beautifully. As we walked out of the warehouse and into the blinding daylight, I could feel it settling over us, that final, undeniable shift, that fundamental change in the atmosphere. That was the moment where everything escalated past the point of return. Normal relationship milestones? Gone. We had bypassed dating and gone straight into kidnapping, physical violence, aggressive public claiming, and toxic possession. Our dynamic was messy. It was hopelessly complicated. It was absolutely, fundamentally terrible for our long-term mental health. And yet, as Julian opened the door to the waiting armored SUV and ushered me inside, I couldn't stop myself from smiling, because there is no going back to normal now. And honestly, I wouldn't want to. So, let's do a quick recap of my romantic trajectory, shall we? I hijacked a billionaire's public proposal, got myself intentionally entangled with a sociopath, engaged in mutual illegal surveillance, got kidnapped by a jealous, aesthetic angel of an ex-fiancé, started a small-scale psychological war, physically won a fight in a warehouse, and somehow miraculously ended up in a stable relationship. Okay, fine. Stable is a very strong, legally dubious word to use here. Let's go with functionally unhinged but mutually agreed upon. Life after the great warehouse kidnapping incident has been surprisingly normal. That is, of course, if your definition of normal includes daily biometric check-ins, permanent live location tracking on all devices, casual, aggressive possessiveness, and the occasional soft reminder over morning coffee that I will financially and physically ruin anyone who attempts to interfere with my man. Julian adapted. Again, he is terrifyingly good at that. Now, he doesn't just tolerate the tracking, he actively participates in it. He tells me exactly where he is before I even have the chance to ask. He sends photographic proof of his location without being prompted. He answers my phone calls on the very first ring, even if he is in the middle of a multi-million-dollar acquisition. It is character growth. It is beautiful. It is inspirational. It is also slightly concerning to witness a titan of industry completely submit to my chaotic whims. Julian. I am in the quarterly board meeting. Attach a high-angle picture of the boardroom table. I smiled at the notification on my lock screen. Me, I didn't ask. Julian, I know. Oh, he is learning initiative now. That is so deeply dangerous for my sanity. He is softer with me now, not weak. Do not mistake the shift for weakness. Julian Vance will never be a weak man. He is just hyper-aware, tuned entirely to my frequency. You didn't sleep well last night, Julian observed one rainy morning, standing in the kitchen in his perfectly tailored suit, handing me a mug of black coffee. I blinked through my exhaustion, taking the hot mug. How do you know that? I didn't move. You were online at 3:14 a.m. You opened 3 different applications. Pause. I stared at him over the rim of the mug. I slowly let a grin stretch across my face. Are you actively monitoring my screen time now? Yes. Oh my God, how the tables have turned, I laughed. A genuine bubbling sound. Good for you. My toxicity is finally rubbing off on you. Julian didn't laugh, but his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. I am not entirely sure that is a positive development for my mental health, Asher. Are you kidding? It's the best thing that ever happened to you. A long, quiet pause. The sound of rain hit the massive kitchen windows. "It is," Julian agreed softly, his voice a low rumble. "Yeah, he is gone, completely, hopelessly gone. But here is the most important part of this entire catastrophic equation. He is not just blindly following my orders anymore. He chooses it. If I stand across a crowded room and tell him, 'Come here,' he comes immediately. But it isn't because he feels forced. It isn't because he is afraid of my reaction. He walks to me because he desperately, inherently wants to. That is the profound difference between cold, sterile control and terrifying, fiery devotion. And me? Oh, I got so much worse, obviously. I leaned entirely into the madness. More public claiming, more physical touching, more "don't look at him, look at me" energy directed at anyone who dared to breathe his general direction. Public spaces, private events, corporate galas. It didn't matter. "You are being very obvious," a wealthy socialite whispered to me once at a charity dinner, eyeing my hand resting heavily on Julian's thigh under the table. "Thank you," I replied brightly. "That wasn't a compliment," she sneered, looking slightly horrified. "It is to me," I chirped, not breaking eye contact, "because I don't hide what belongs to me." She excused herself from the table 3 minutes later. Weak. We were out at yet another event a few weeks later. Another massive ballroom filled with crystal, and people pretending they weren't aggressively staring at the billionaire who had dumped perfection for chaos. Julian stood firmly beside me. He was calm, composed, and completely different from the man I met at graduation. He wasn't radiating cold, unapproachable ice anymore. He was just intensely, singularly focused on me. Across the room, near the champagne fountain, a young, overly confident heir kept looking over. It was too long of a stare, too interested, too hungry. I noticed. Of course I noticed. I have a radar for these things. So, I reached out, grabbed the lapels of Julian's immaculate tuxedo jacket, pulled him down smoothly, and kissed him right in the middle of the ballroom. It was the same move as before, the same claim, but the execution was entirely different. This time, Julian didn't freeze in shock. This time his hand immediately wrapped around my waist, pulling me flush against his chest, and he kissed me back first, deeply, possessively. Oh, that's a fantastic new development. When I finally pulled away, breathless and flushed, I didn't look up at Julian. I turned my head, looked straight past the crowd, and locked eyes with the staring heir by the fountain. I held the guy's gaze. I didn't blink. I just smiled. A slow, terrifying, deeply arrogant smile. "Got a problem?" I mouthed across the room. The heir turned pale, looked down at his shoes, and immediately walked the other way. Predictable. Beside me, Julian exhaled quietly. He wasn't annoyed by the public spectacle. He wasn't tense about the breach of etiquette. He sounded almost amused. "I am yours, Asher," Julian murmured, his deep voice vibrating against my shoulder. Soft, calm, utterly certain. I glanced up at him. I studied his striking face, the dark intensity in his gray eyes, that look of total, deliberate surrender. He was handing me the keys to his entire existence, and he was doing it with a smile. I reached up, tracing his jawline, a slow, immensely satisfied grin spreading across my face. "Right," I whispered back. "Mine, forever, no hesitation, no lingering doubts, no takebacks. Here is the absolute truth of the matter. From the outside looking in, we look completely insane. We look toxic, suffocating, and entirely too much. And honestly, maybe we are. But inside this, inside whatever twisted, bizarre, highly monitored bubble we have built together, it works flawlessly. I don't try to fix his broken pieces. He doesn't try to suppress my chaotic nature. He willfully lets me take the reins of his life, and I willfully anchor him to the ground so he doesn't float away. It is simple, beautifully unbalanced, and entirely perfect for us. People fall in love in all kinds of different ways. Some people fall softly, like rain, slowly, carefully, building a foundation over years of therapy and polite conversation. We didn't do that. We crashed into each other at 100 miles an hour. We grabbed onto the wreckage with bloody hands, and we violently refused to let go. Our love is messy. It is inherently possessive. It is a little suffocating, paranoid, and completely unhinged. But it is real. God, it is so incredibly real. And honestly, if the universe somehow rewound time, if I had to go back and do it all over again, I would. I would still sit in that sweltering, stupid graduation hall. I would still stand up and interrupt that multi-million-dollar proposal. I would still stride across the stage, grab his cold wrist, and shout to the world, "If he doesn't want you, I'll take you, because now, he absolutely wants me. And more importantly, he chose to want me," which, in my completely unbiased opinion, is the greatest plot twist of all.